Hello, my name is Jonathan Homrighausen. I am a lecturer in Judaic Studies at the College of William and Mary, and thank you for attending my talk. My main area of scholarship is the Hebrew Bible, but today I'd like to speak to you about another subject that I write and speak and study, which is scribal craft and calligraphic art and their intersection with sacred text. And today I'd like to speak to you about pilgrimage as a textual theme and an artistic process in two works of contemporary calligraphic art. I want to argue that in manuscript arts, in book arts, the pilgrimage of the page, the pilgrimage of our eye, the pilgrimage of our hand as it turns the page, and even the pilgrimage of the scribe and the scribe's hand as they create the page is all kind of a journey that leads us to a center, some sort of sacred center. And I will lead you through two works of contemporary Roman alphabet calligraphic art, both of which engage biblical texts that will show you this theme, this idea of the eye's pilgrimage. The theme I'm working with, imagined pilgrimage, has been written about before in pilgrimage scholarship. These are not literal journeys to a place with many weeks of walking, but interior pilgrimages, imagined pilgrimages that are spurred on by art or music or storytelling. So on the left, we have Glastonbury as evoked by William Blake in one of his manuscripts. At the top right, the labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. As Daniel Connolly argues, the labyrinth is a kind of journey to the center, Jerusalem, the cosmic center of the world, and journey back, which was echoing medieval Christian pilgrimages to Jerusalem or desires to make pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Another kind of pilgrimage, maps in Bibles. Joan Taylor argues that early printings of the King James Version of the Bible, the maps were more accurate to the Bible than to what cartographers knew of the Holy Land at that time, suggesting that these were more imagined pilgrimages where the Bible reader could follow the Israelites around, follow them out of Egypt. The Bible reader could imagine themselves moving along with Abraham and Sarah on their journeys. So another kind of imagined pilgrimage. The first work I'd like to talk to you about today is a pilgrim psalm. This is by Anne Heckel. She is a British calligrapher and artist. I think she is now probably in her early 80s, so has a long career of making art, and in the 1980s had an especially productive period of revolutionizing what calligraphy could do with text, with orality, and with sound. And this manuscript book of Psalm 121 reflects that. Psalm 121 is one of the Psalms of Ascents, Psalms 120 to 134. These are a group of Psalms that have been, at least since medieval times, imagined as Psalms sung by, prayed by, recited by pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem during the era of the First and Second Temple. So these are pilgrimage festivals that are written about in Exodus and Deuteronomy, and these were perhaps, they're imagined by Jews and Christians to be prayed in that context. They don't really specify themselves, but the association of these psalms with pilgrimage runs very deep, and I think it's fruitful to read Anne Heckel's manuscript book through that lens. Anne Heckel is using the Miles Coverdale translation of the Psalter from the Church of England's Book of Common Prayer. Her book opens with the Psalm's first lines, "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help." We can often imagine this psalm as a dialogue between a pilgrim setting out on a journey and some sort of religious figure giving a benediction. And there's an ambiguity in the first line over whether it's a statement, my help comes from the hills, or a question, where will my help come from? And in the ancient Hebrew, we don't have a question mark. There isn't that sort of punctuation. So there's some ambiguity. But even at the first page, Anne Heckel is playing with word and image, crafting words into images. So the I of lift is literally lifted up, as is the U of up, which is uneven, kind of moving upwards to the right. So the lifting up your eyes is something you're doing as you're reading the book. Note the cadences of oral speech. There's something here about chant, about recitation, and that is structured on the page. To this day, this Psalm 121 is also used in travelers' prayers in Judaism. The next pages begin showing even more closely the cadences of oral speech. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved, and he that keepeth thee will not sleep. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. And Haeckel isolates certain words, uses spacing and line breaks to emphasize words that would also be emphasized in an oral performance of the poem. He will not suffer thy foot. Behold, he that keepeth Israel. Notice the Israel is slightly larger. Additionally, this language is echoing another psalm, fairly well known now in the era of this pandemic, Psalm 91, which is also sort of psalm of protection. There's also a forward movement within this poem because of the way that certain key words and phrases repeat from one line to the next. He that keepeth thee will not sleep. He that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Biblical scholars call this staircase parallelism, and it gives the poem a sense of forward movement, very befitting of a pilgrimage. But then Anne Haeckel changes the cadence of the written orality of her manuscript. On the third page, the Lord himself is thy keeper. The Lord is thy defense upon thy right hand. On this page, the voice is softer, quieter. It seems almost more intimate and personal because the writing is more close to someone's ordinary handwriting. It's not in all capitals. There's minuscules and majuscules as well. And the little flourishes above and below the verse that kind of remind us of the presence of the scribe. And of course, thy right hand, always important for a calligrapher. But this also crescendos into the next page, the center of the psalm as Anne Haeckel structures it, so that the sun shall not burn thee by day, neither the moon by night. Here, Anne Haeckel is using gilding to emphasize these particular ideas. Note that the N in burn is itself burnt, that the O's in moon are linked together, emphasizing the circularity of the letter O, which echoes with the shape of the moon, the full moon anyway. These kinds of visual verbal coincidences, Haeckel calls them word shapes, and she tends to explore them in many of her works. And this is something with a very long medieval heritage as well. There's also a little star on the eye of night, again, echoing the night sky. Haeckel then shifts back to a soft note. I call this visual chant. In many other places, I have called calligraphy visual music, but here I think it's more chant-like, even evoking the Anglican psalmody that Anne Haeckel grew up with. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. Yea, it is even he that shall keep thy soul. And again, the flourishes. The last page of the psalm, the Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and forevermore. Here, Haeckel makes your eye actually follow the pattern of going out, left to right, and thy coming in, right to left, even though we read English writing left to right. Your eye is following that line of writing, going out and coming in. And it's the going out and coming in that I think makes this psalm and Haeckel's telling of this psalm particularly exciting and pilgrimage relevant. Because once you read that last page, you might notice then that the whole book is structured like a chiasm. She creates a visual narrative of the psalm, the going out and the coming in, to accompany the verbal narrative of going up to Jerusalem. Because of course, every pilgrimage has to make the journey home. And so if you're only going to the temple and the psalm just stops there, then you're not really understanding the movement of the pilgrim in both directions. So at first, the psalm seems to be one-dimensional, one-directional, but soon you realize that it's going in and it's coming out. It's the structure of the labyrinth. And the visual narrative and the verbal narratives interplay suggest a deeper possibility for the way we read the psalm. So form and content are playing with each other in creative, dynamic ways. The second piece I'd like to talk about is from the St. John's Bible. This is the first major illuminated manuscript of the entire Catholic Bible, commissioned by a Benedictine monastery in 500 years. It was completed in 2011 after 13 years of work. And within the 7 volumes of the St. John's Bible, and if you're curious, I urge you to see it. It's quite a wondrous work. The Song of Songs is the most densely illuminated book in the entire St. John's Bible. Here it opens with these geometric patterns that are floating all over the page around the margins of the text. And on the next pages, these patterns continue and culminate in the garden temple, as I call it. This is the garden in the Song of Songs, which is also both the setting of the songs and a woman's body of this erotic love poetry. And it is a pomegranate, which a very erotic plant, biblically speaking. But also, I argue that in the St. John's Bible, the iconography of the square is the iconography of the temple. And this sort of canonical reading of the Bible in the context of iconography and symbolism is all over the St. John's Bible. So here in the building of the temple, of the first temple under King Solomon, we have an image of, again, the square motif. And at the top of the square motif, stamps with one of the doorways from the Santiago de Compostela Cathedral. So it's an image of pilgrimage. It's an image of movement towards a sacred place. The image of a door also evokes the image of Jesus in the Gospel of John as the gate for the sheep, as the door. And this particular stamp, the double arched doorway of this particular facade from the Cathedral de Santiago de Compostela, is all over the St. John's Bible, including in the Psalms. Very fitting, because Psalms, of course, are prayed and chanted in churches today, as they were in the Middle Ages, as they were in the temple in ancient Israel. The square motif appears again in Nehemiah, the people coming back from exile, returning to the Holy Land, and here represented by small geometric patterns coming back to the central square, coming back to the holy city. So return from exile is also a kind of pilgrimage home. In Ezekiel's vision of the new temple, Donald Jackson draws on previous images of the temple. This was drawn from a 17th century Dutch engraving. I couldn't find exactly which one this was, but it looks a great deal like other diagrams of the temple and that are found in early modern printed books, including this one from a treatise by Isaac Newton. There was a great deal of interest in the geometry of the temple, the architecture of the temple as a kind of reflection of cosmic perfection, a blueprint for the universe. And this goes back to the Middle Ages as well, where manuscripts had images and diagrams of tabernacle and temple. Here is from Codex Amiatinus, very important Vulgate manuscript. And this has been related to the medieval rhetorical idea of the memory palace, but theologically, it also suggests the book itself as a kind of temple. And since we know in the Gospel of John, Jesus is described as the temple, his body is the temple, then the Word made flesh becomes here the manuscript book written on parchment, flesh, which is seen as a kind of representation of the Word and of the presence of the divine. So this is a long heritage in Christian art of images of temple and tabernacle, and the Word made flesh, made book, the book as part of the presence of God in community. So all of that coming into the Song of Songs in the St. John's Bible. But once you enter into the temple, the square motif, all of these geometric patterns converge. And I want to think about this as a kind of absorption. Your eye is caught in the geometric patterns, and it leads you into a sort of slowing, a sort of coming to the center. We could call it the Holy of Holies, that scholars of insular art, where geometric patterns are abundant, often link to the Lectio Divina, the way that monastic Christianity engages scripture, this very slow, imaginative reading where you ponder every word and phrase in the fullness of its typological, canonical, Christological senses. All of that spurred on by the use of geometry. Michelle Brown, an art historian, calls these portals of prayer. And I think that's also what's happening here in the St. John's Bible. Like Anne Heckel, it's a journey to the center. Your eye moves around the page, finds the center, and stays there, rests there, ponders the words that are being read. The Song of Songs, this ancient love poetry that has been read by both Jews and Christians as being not only about love between humans, but love between humanity and God. So both Donald Jackson in the St. John's Bible and Anne Heckel in her Psalm 121 book structure a pilgrimage of the eye to the center, a pilgrimage of the eye as well as a pilgrimage of the hand, turning the pages. But even writing these Bibles is a kind of pilgrimage. Donald Jackson quotes this famous line, a lot of calligraphers quote this line, a line is a dot that went for a walk. And Jackson paraphrases it, drawing is like taking a line for a walk. He says, imagine dipping a goose pen quill into ink, taking it on a journey, letter by letter, gliding from hairline stroke to fat black, word by word, from beginning to the end of every chapter and verse in the Bible. And this took a very long time to write. And Donald Jackson employed a whole team of scribes to do the work alongside him. Jackson even compares writing to walking in the rhythm of writing. He says that when you read something written by hand, you can see the heartbeat and breath of the scribe. This heartbeat and breath, the bodily rhythm of just moving forward that is so well known to a pilgrim who's walking for days, one foot in front of the other. And the scribes who wrote the St. John's Bible describe the daily physical rhythm of writing, the physical difficulty of the writing. And this metaphorical connection between writing and walking is even found in Latin. The word ductus, from whence we get aqueduct, is also used to describe the outlines, the shapes of a letter. And like an aqueduct, a quill draws the liquid to where it needs to go. So in sum, these manuscripts are not imagined pilgrimage and that they lead to a specific place or that they are souvenirs like pilgrim badges, but they are pilgrimages to the temple, to the center, and they're viewing, they're reading. All of this is a kind of pilgrimage and movement. And the metaphor helps us think about not only calligraphy and manuscript arts, but the all the possibilities for imagined pilgrimage in our own time. Thank you.